Hey folks, so what you're about to watch right now is actually a continuation of the conversation that we released this week about Savant Syndrome. When me and the guys were recording that episode, it was actually 2 hours long. I cut a bunch of shit out of it. But basically around the end of what you saw, it led us into this kind of deep sort of tangent into all the topics that we've talked about, but how that sort of now relates to the way that we view the world and maybe our views and our thoughts and our beliefs as it pertains to things like, consciousness and religion and what's real and what's not real and what's possible, what's impossible. So we thought we would package this up and give it to you as a little fun bonus episode, especially if you really enjoyed that recording. I think you'll find a lot of stuff in this to be really fascinating. So without further ado, let's dive into the continuation of our discussion surrounding Savant Syndrome and maybe telepathy.
And if we could just expand it, give a little bit of breathing room here to just be open to looking into things that seem impossible, because I think a lot of things that we think are impossible actually are possible. We just don't have a framework for it yet.
Yeah, it makes me listening to the show, it made me think about that we don't have the tools, and there are pieces of the world that it seems like we don't understand yet because you're going, there's this thing happening and it seems real. And the show goes to great lengths to try and address the skeptical nature that they know will come with all this. And that, going back to the idea of you've got this gorge between the cliff that you're on and the cliff that you can see across from you, that we will build that bridge. If this is truly true,
eventually
we will eventually build the bridge that allows us to understand why and how this is happening. And that bridge will not just allow us to understand that thing, it will allow us to understand a million other things.
I hope so. Because again, and maybe we'll talk to Diane about this. When Diane started doing this work 20 years ago, she had her license stripped from her. Mm-hmm. And it was only was it reinstated after somebody on the board who stripped her of her license as a psychiatrist, was after someone on the board finally read her book, The ESP Enigma.
Which was...
And they stripped it because she wrote the book. She wrote the book. They went, this is crazy. Your book's called The ESP Enigma. We can't associate with you. Stripped her of her license. And then years later, someone on the board read it and went, you know what? We're so sorry. And they gave it back to her. Now here, okay, great. She got her license back. But at that point, the damage is done. She's labeled as a quack. And so how much does that set her work back? And even today, with these unbelievable accounts of these children doing these things, which in Diane's eyes, the tests that they were doing on these children on the podcast, they don't hold up to scientific rigor because they were too loose, right? They really need to They need lab do conditions. This in lab conditions that are very rigorous. But the problem is that this is so impossible that for someone like Diane to actually be able to do this properly, there's no funding that's ever going to be given to her until this shift happens within the scientific community that again accepts and allows for the investigation into something that seems impossible.
Which also feels like it's happening now. And
hopefully, yeah.
The other interesting thing that I thought was so if you consider the fact that one, we know Savant Syndrome exists, and then it's not hard to make a leap from that and accepting that to accepting the fact that some form of telepathy exists, and at least in the ways that we've seen it in the telepathy tapes. But from there, if you start to think of shared consciousness and whether that's a shared consciousness or another dimension that we're accessing or whatever, however this is working, then you start to think about even bigger things like religion,
yeah,
and a lot of other like maybe things that are labeled as conspiracy theories that are out there, and the possibility of those things, some things like that being true.
Is Taylor Swift really dead? Has Taylor Swift been dead since 2013?
Yeah. Is Tupac still alive too?
Did Nelson Mandela really die in jail?
Yeah. And so when you start asking those questions, you start to realize that you can't really trust anybody, especially not the government or mainstream media.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not audio.
That's not what I was going at. But
God
I really,
is king. You can only trust God.
But what I do really mean is like after I listen to that, as somebody who also feels like I'm very skeptical, especially upon initially learning about something that seems pretty far out. I when I was listening to telepathy tapes, I was thinking like, if I accept this, what other things do I have to like reconsider that I might believe in that I don't feel like I do now?
Yeah, totally.
Which was a trip.
It is, and you know what? I think that's. I mean, I went through the same thing, and I've been kind of going through that sort of like, I don't know, juggle, like mental mind for the last like couple of years, I think. And I don't think that's a bad thing. To be honest with you, I think it's actually probably, like, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I think that the raising those questions based on hearing conversations like this and thinking a little bit more, thinking about reality with a more open mind and a less skeptic view, for me personally, it's actually profoundly shifted the way that I go about my day, right? Like this is going to sound maybe a bit crazy, but like it's just by virtue of having those types of like thought experiments on my own, I feel like it's actually made me a more compassionate, empathetic person who is moving through the world with like the prerogative and the priority of love first.
How though? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, what is that? Why do you think those things are connected? Like you feeling this more of a sense of compassion and being open.
I think that
open-minded. I guess.
I think that's like probably for an entirely different podcast. But without like going too deep into it, you know, and also because I'm like still trying to work this all out in my head. But to your point about if I start to allow this to be a belief or like a something that I'm open to, then it opens up like, well, then I have to start to think about like, what does that mean for, say, like, you know, religious scripture and things that like we've in most recent history kind of brushed off as like fairy tales. When you start to go down that road, and for me personally, like this is somewhat, even slightly tied to a more like spiritual way of looking at the world. I truly feel like I've had in the last like 2 years this slow drip of like a spiritual awakening. Like I've found a part of myself that a part of my spirituality that did not exist a couple of years ago, to the degree where like I'm, you know, I've been looking around, sourcing out like a local mass that I might start partaking in, you know, going back and rereading the Bible. I mean, if you'd said that I would read the Bible 2 years ago, I'd be like, oh, there's no way I'm reading the Bible. And now I'm reading the Holy Bible, and it's sick, dude. The Bible is sick.
Maybe we should say this for another podcast, but
for sure, it's different.
And do you think, like, do you feel more that you're just like generally spiritually open?
Yeah.
And like, it's not necessarily about like believing in the Bible, but like, hey, there's probably, you know, like the Bible is very similar to the Quran, or to like, there's a lot of like shared stories. And so like,
I very quickly, for the majority of my life, would would hear anything about religion and immediately have a preconceived reaction of rolling my eyes and going, shut the f up.
That's just made to control the
regardless
masses.
Regardless of what was even said about it. Like I would just have this instinctive reaction of, ugh. And now whenever I hear anything about religion, whether it's someone's religious views or their beliefs or even like a story that is tied to some religious scripture, that eye roll is not my reaction. Instead, now it's like a reaction that stems from curiosity and openness and like acceptance, right? Like if I met someone who was an Orthodox Jew a few years ago, I might have this sort of like, I guess, I don't know, like response or feeling of like, oh, I'm going to have a wall up here because like we're not going to relate to each other. Your worldview is so different from mine that because you believe in this, like you actually believe in this bull that, and this isn't like conscious thought. I think this is all subconscious. It's just
that's the way I feel now.
Right.
Like I feel, and even hearing you talk about being open to religion, there's like a visceral feeling that I get where I'm like,
and I don't talk, and like, this is not something I talk about.
Like,
this is like probably the first time I've like openly talked about this.
You know, it's funny. I saw a graph the other day that was it was a graph of openness to new experience and ideas through the decades of your life based on like a huge, like a massive population number.
You have the data?
Yeah. And
so an actual study, like a
oh cool yeah. And it like showed how you wax.
I was
and
surprised
wane
at the data,
through openness to new ideas, and how I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there was like, you know, there's a surge in your like early 20s, I think, and then like you dip down, and then like in your mid 30s you spike back up, and like that lasts into like around 40, and then like from like 40 to 60 you're pretty like closed off. And that
I was surprised at the 60.
Yeah, and then you spike back up around 60, which probably has to do with retirement. So I would say there's like a bit of a dark age where you're not as open to new experience and ideas, like maybe when you have children,
statistically,
and like you're more likely to be just like bogged down with like responsibility rather than like even just like the capacity to open up to things. And then and then like around your like late 50s, early 60s, people are retiring, their children aren't around anymore. That all of a sudden, like the world opens up to them again. They want to go travel. They want to do this and they go and do that. And it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Of like how you open and close to new things through your life.
But Jared, just to come back to like you sharing that about your openness to religion, like I want to be where you are, and I do, and I feel that like subconscious feeling towards religion where I'm like very like closed off to it. But like my logical brain wants to be more open-minded to it. And after listening to telepathy tapes, I feel like I shifted one sort of notch closer to being open.
I kind of feel like the whole, like you've got religion and you've got, I mean, religion and science are like always seemingly at odds with each other. And then you've got okay, so let's talk, like, you guys know, like the God of the Gaps thing.
By the way, guys, we could do this forever, but Jared, we have a meeting right now too.
I mean,
but
yeah, that's not important to me right now.
You've got the God of the Gaps idea that anything that you can't explain using science is where God gets invoked, but then science advances and science overtakes or draws into its realm this understanding that used to be explained by God. And so God is like an ever receding thing because like, as we understand more and more, that's the God of the Gaps thing. So there's all this stuff that can't be explained and we don't know how to explain it. And we either try to use science to understand it and we can't. And if we can't, then we invoke God in some way. And so when I hear the telepathy tapes, I feel a lot of that. Like I feel like I'm going, I feel like a lot of this, a lot like consciousness, which still eludes us in every way, shape, and form.
Fully,
and we really, I don't know if we're any closer to to an understanding of consciousness now than we were, 1,000 years ago. And that religion is an attempt to fill in the gaps of like what consciousness is and tries to explain it with these things. And science can't explain it yet. And will it ever? I don't know. And so it's like, and then the same thing with this telepathy thing, with telepathy tapes. It's like, is there just like, have we not invented, like, is it maybe it's not religion and it's not God and it's not even science. Like,
it's multi-dimensions.
Is there another thing? Is there another thing entirely that might elude humans for humans' entire existence?
To your point there, and to answer your question of like, you saying, I hear what you're saying, and I want to be more closer to that. But like, I still have these feelings. I think one of the things that kind of helped allow me to get to that, to get to this point is sort of touching on a little bit what you said there, Tay, which is like, okay, the first thing is to separate the word religion away from all of the like that is piled around it, right?
Yeah.
So like when you hear religion, and this is why I rolled my eyes, a while back. Like I grew up Roman Catholic as a kid, but like we stopped going to church when I was like 10 because I told my mom, like, I don't believe in this anymore. And then as I got older, the more you start to learn about like the institution of Catholicism or the institution of religion in and of itself, how much it's tied to like just horrific, like war and death and control and money. And then of course you have all the things that are like that the Catholic Church has been dealing with for years, of like these poor kids that are being abused, and like all that stuff gets tied to religion, and all of those things are real, and all those things are true. They have happened, and it's horrible. However, at the same time, if you can separate religion from those things, because I mean, when you say like, oh, the government is doing this, it like that, what the does that even mean? Like the government is not just, it's not just one singular living body.
Yeah.
It's a massive structure of a whole bunch of these things that are happening. Religion is the same thing. Down to its core, religion has nothing to do with war. Religion has nothing to do with abuse. At its core, religion has to do with love and meaning and making meaning of the world and all these things.
Those are the things that I'm attracted to. The things
Right.
I have an aversion to are the claims that they can explain why the world is the way that it is, or how it came to be. And those things that are like, they claim to be sort of explanations of the things that we can't prove.
And here's the other part that you need to separate. So first separate the like the things that religion has done from the term religion, right? That's the first step. The second step is to also recognize that terms like angels and God and prophets and all of that stuff, that's also not religion. That's just the human
story
attempt at trying to understand this thing. And so,
it's trying to describe
something that's indescribable
that you can understand.
And it's been a long game of telephone that has changed over the generations and over the generations. And so like if someone says if someone says that they had an experience where they saw an alien at night that they had this like communication with, and it looked like this and it told me that, well, like did you see an alien? Like, you think you saw an alien and it's like from Zeta Reticuli? Probably not. But the reason that you're stating it that way is because that's the meme that you've attached it to, because the basis of your understanding of what this possibly could be has been shaped by all the different factors. And the same thing you can say about religion. I saw an angel, it told me this, and it told me that. And at that time, your understanding of the world, that's what you've been taught. That's how you've been, and so that's how you've been programmed to like identify this thing. But that doesn't make that thing an angel.
Right.
It's just the way, it's the only way, the words you have to put label to it.
The thing that you're saying is that, when I say UFO to you, you think of an image in your head, but the actual words UFO are unidentified flying object,
Mhm.
which the literal meaning of that is we don't know what it is, yet everybody has their own version of what that is in their head.
But because of movies and because of whatever, we have
an
this
image
thing where
of
it's
what
like,
a UFO
well,
is.
yeah, it's.
I mean,
it's
like
this, but
know already, Bri, that there's a spectrum of religion, and in a lot of ways, there's probably a spectrum of religion that you don't even really think about as religion, maybe immediately because it doesn't evoke the same feeling or image in your head, like Christianity or Catholicism is like red light religion, but like Hinduism and Buddhism probably doesn't have that flashing light to you because, and going back to the whole claims thing, like there are certain religions that make massive claims about the world that we live in. But like the essence of that religion is really in like the lessons that are taught through like the adversity or whatever of the stories. But things like Buddhism and Hinduism, they don't make as bold claims about the world.
There's also a lot of imagery.
Or they don't, or at least then how they've been portrayed culturally. You get like, you'd probably have a lot of success talking to somebody in India who is a devout Hindu and go, how's the world really made? And they'd be like, well, I feel like it's probably really made like this. But in my culture, we think about it this way. We think about it through the god of Brahman and whatever. And they have this like, it's almost like they're not as dogmatic.
But that's because
so it doesn't evoke
like
the same
Hinduism,
religious
the gods are not represented by humans. You know, like in Catholicism, when we think of Jesus, he's in the shape of a man. And like, that's a thing that is like harder for me to believe when we put like godly qualities on human beings. But I like the stories where, you know, even when you learn about like Egyptian culture and religion, it's like, you know, they're not human gods. They're like these animals or like, you know, things that are so almost like extraterrestrial, where it's easier to like discern the sort of messages of the stories rather than having to believe that like those were actual people.
I think probably the biggest issue of religion over time and how it's like solidified in like the human experience, like, is the word belief. Like, we don't need to believe, we just need to learn. Like, they all have lessons. Mm-hmm. We don't need to believe any of them. We don't need to believe that in any thing of happened them.
Or whatever.
Like, there's, in my opinion, there's not really much value to believing them that they happened.
Yeah,
that they're
you
true.
know what though? Like my stance on that is yeah, I think that's useful for sure. But that doesn't get down to the bottom of like the fact that there is a very real possibility, at least in my view, that there are things that are so far beyond our like ability to comprehend these things that like that influence us without us even knowing. So again, back to the telepathy tapes, like whatever's going on here. And especially when you listen to these kids where they're like, even when they describe, you know, what's happening on the hill or their experiences, they're often talking about like angels. They're talking about it from a Catholic kind of viewpoint, like angels and these divine beings that are teaching these things.
And likely because they're all American.
Sure, exactly, right? So okay, yes, but the belief of like the learning of like the ways in which religion is telling its people or its followers like this, these are the ways of being good. It's all based on love. That's great, but that doesn't explain the greater lack of understanding of some thing that exists outside of our purview that is like influencing us on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's the innate knowledge might not be the right word, understanding might not be the right word, but those are the ones that come to mind, that there is a consciousness.
Right. But
and we're trying to explain
but even that, so you say that, and that's gonna trigger some like, oh, consciousness, like some sort of preconceived notion of what that even means. And I think that is like, even that isn't enough, right? So yeah. I guess my whole point here is like,
but we need language, but like we can't get away with not using language, unfortunately.
Well, we can.
If you ask me,
telepathically communicate.
If you ask me, I believe in quote unquote, I believe in aliens. I believe in angels. I believe in demons. I believe in fairies and fays. I believe in all those things, but also at the exact same time, fairies aren't fairies. Aliens aren't aliens. Angels aren't angels. I believe all of those things exist, but I don't believe that all of those things are what we are stating they are. I don't think we know what they are. I think we have tried to make an attempt to explain it. And that attempt to explain it changes each era, depending on what our sort of worldview is based on the things that we've been hearing or regurgitating or whatever. But I believe all those things exist. There's something there. I just don't know what it is. And I don't want to put a label or a name to it, but I think they're all the same thing.
I think they're just different functions of our psychology that we try to personify with with beings. They're like the way that our brains work. It's like an attempt to describe the way that our brains work. Like all these things are different functions of our psychology. And so like if we're thinking about like an angel or we're thinking about a demon, you know, like you assign like good to one and bad to the other, and like the thoughts that you have and the way that you have, like you wax and wane between, you know, like I think this is good, or the way that you act or the way that you behave. It's like a way of personifying a function of our psychology that leads us in different directions and makes us do different things. And
I think it's beyond. I think it's beyond that though. I think it's something that's outside of just us. I think it is some other form of,
other than aliens. I think aliens are for sure.
I think it's some other form of sentience, or like, even if you could give it that sort of label.
Do you think
that has an influence over us that is detached from us directly?
Like within our ability to perceive it, like sort of like, you know, they say that like dogs can see a certain spectrum of color. Well, I mean, that's true based on the cones in their eyes, but
yeah, like our inability,
we just have such a narrow bandwidth of experience that those things exist beyond what
like
we can
Wi-Fi.
actually
Like right now we can't see Wi-Fi, but it's everywhere in this room.
Yeah,
but we can't
magnets,
see it.
How do they work?
But the tides, they come, they go.
Yeah.
No one can explain it. Anyway, all that to say, like one of the reasons I love thinking about this stuff is that I have found that it's actually been like a really useful tool in allowing me to be more open and like compassionate. And like, I really do feel like I'm moving through the world with a lot more love than I had a couple of years ago. And even if you could get a sliver of that, I think that's one thing that a lot of us could use a hell of a lot more of. And I don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
But like just opening yourself up to the possibility of miraculous things being true, if it brings you even the slightest amount of that, I think it's worth investigating and looking into and opening your mind to.
I think that's the thing that I don't do enough is like be open to how. So hearing you say that, like what you're saying ultimately is that you feel objectively like a better person because of your beliefs, because you believe in those things.
And I think I think having skepticism is good, but I think labeling yourself as like, I'm a skeptic, I think you are doing yourself a disservice because you are identifying in a way that literally is putting up a wall and blocking off the potential for a lot of things that can be quite beneficial to you. And without even consciously being aware of it. I think like being this, like the skeptic's mind, I think is one of the problems that kind of lands us where we are today, in where people like Diane Hennessy Powell is labeled a quack or isn't able to actually like investigate these things where there's something obviously going on. And so I think like, yes, healthy skepticism is important, but also way more importantly is to check yourself and make sure that skepticism is healthy and not something that's unconsciously preventing you from seeing something or being open to like receiving something that is potential.
There's a difference between being a skeptic and being somebody who
judgmental,
is being,
irrationally judgmental.
Just like the way that like if somebody 10 years ago was like, hey, what's up? Like God is great. And you're like, okay, whatever. Like
I think that's easy to say, but I also think it's a lot. I think that a lot of people are more unproductively skeptic than they they might think they are.
Like that's a
because again, preconceived notions in the way that you've just come in, like gone through the world.
That's an issue with discernment, which is maybe the toughest and least available skill to most people is like, how do I discern? Like if I say I'm a skeptic, what I mean is like, I'm not going to take everything that you say to me as truth. I'm going to think about it. And I expect at least some nugget of evidence or proof to start to pull the thread. Like, if you tell me that picture behind you can just like get off the wall and float away, I'm not just going to go, yes, I believe that. I'm going to go, okay, tell me, okay, that would be fascinating to see that. How could that happen? And like provide me with a little bit so that I can pull that thread to understand it more.
But also like if Jer believes that picture can get off the wall and fly away, and he's not telling us that we have to believe that too, and it makes him happy to believe that, and he's a compassionate and better human objectively because he believes in things like that and is open to possibilities like that.
We don't need to call him a loser for it.
We don't need to judge him. Like when you say, Jared, that you're open to religion, and it makes me feel this like a little bit of feeling where I'm like, oh, whoa, that's weird. Like I'm being judgmental.
Yeah.
Like I'm being the dick.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Again, like think about when we have like someone like Dave McGinley in
judgmental.
here and hear him talk about his experience and his beliefs. If you go into a conversation like that and you have that wall up, well, then you're preventing yourself from getting to know someone who's extraordinarily fascinating and beautiful.
There is a difference when I walk down.
Skeptical is kind of just a synonym for curiosity.
Yeah.
Like it's like if I'm skeptical, it really just means I'm curious.
Yeah,
but there's a difference.
But again, really investigate if that is true for you, because I think for a lot of people it isn't.
There's a difference when you're walking, like when I'm walking down the street and there's those guys standing on the corner with the pictures of abortions, and they're like, "You're not allowed to get an abortion because it's against my religion," and they're like preaching to people and like pushing that idea on the general public. I don't like that.
Yeah,
like that's fucking
and
crazy.
That's dumb. Like that's dumb. And again, that's a perfect example of the bull that is wrapped around religion that you need to separate from religion. So like really just like completely developing a whole new meaning of the word religion.
You gotta like scrap your.
I think the new age way is like saying like I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And even that is like kind of mired in like a kind of eye rolly, like, oh God, you're gonna what else are you gonna charge your crystal over the moon? Your crystal dildo over the moonlight, over the full moon. But like
that's kind of sick.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, like again, just removing like that's not religion. That's a dogmatic view of what this poor person has been like force fed their whole life. Mm-hmm. That's not what religion is.
Scientology.
And, like when you really boil it down, like again, I said rereading the Holy Bible. I gotta say, Jesus is a rad dude. Like he was the coolest guy. He was truly a rad human. All the things that he's talking about, all the things that he's like projecting, it's all just awesome. And it's like, oh, I want more of those people.
He totally would have been at the Pride Parade too.
Totally.
Right? Like,
yes, man. Yeah. Like truly, like there's anyway, whatever. We could fucking, maybe I'll chop this up and make this like a bonus sort of post discussion.